The hour is 2100. On a Saturday night, I find myself sitting alone in my favorite bar. I have been here for approximately half an hour, slowly sipping on my first beer. Meanwhile, my friend with benefits is out spending her evening pursuing intimacy with another man. She has assured me that she will return to share the details once she has finished. This is not an ideal situation. The optimal scenario is further complicated by the fact that it was her idea, and I endorsed her decision. I do not typically enjoy being submissive in a romantic context, however, when contemplating retribution, one may find themselves acquiescing to demands that they would otherwise reject. I am Ken Singleton, and I would describe myself as a typical middle-class male. I grew up in a small, close-knit rural community near Omaha, which afforded me the opportunity to enjoy the benefits of city life while maintaining a simple lifestyle. My parents had a conventional middle-class marriage, characterized by love, support and the raising of my younger brother. My parents instilled in me a set of solid values, which they exemplified through their active involvement in our school events. They emphasized the importance of integrity and encouraged us to pursue our goals without infringing upon the rights of others. Despite this, I did not always align with their perspectives. By the time I began my undergraduate studies in Lincoln, I had developed a desire for a relationship that emulated theirs. While pursuing casual romantic encounters among the thousands of students at the University of Nebraska, I was seeking a future spouse who would be willing to invest time in finding a suitable partner. That is when I met Naomi Simpson, a lovely brunette studying nursing in Lincoln. In comparison to me, she seemed to be beyond my reach. She was striking in appearance, shorter than my 5 feet 10 inches frame, with green eyes and dimples when she smiled. While she had a bit of extra weight, it only enhanced her figure, giving her soft curves in all the right places. We shared a freshman language class together, and the professor was quite meticulous about seating arrangements were such that we ended up sitting in alphabetical order right from the start. This meant that Simpson sat to the left of Singleton. The memory of our first interaction, when she took the seat next to mine, is still vivid in my mind. I developed strong feelings for her, so when I invited her to join me for soda at the Union after class, I was overjoyed when she accepted. This marked the beginning of a relationship that lasted throughout our college years. Although we decided to postpone our wedding until after graduation, we functioned as a couple throughout. We even moved in together at the beginning of our junior year. Subsequently, we were wed at the large church in Lincoln, which was conveniently located near my hometown. This allowed many of my family and friends to attend the ceremony after our honeymoon. We then took up residence in Omaha, where my wife began her career as an emergency room nurse while I secured a position as a civil engineer at a local firm. As a new employee, I was assigned to the night shift, which entailed spending several nights alone in bed each week. However, the time we spent together when we were both home more than compensated for this. I had long hoped to find an ideal partner, and it seemed as though I had found her. However, due to our conflicting work schedules, we decided to postpone. The decision to delay starting a family enabled us to save money for when one of us eventually chose to stay home with the children. Naomi came to appreciate working the night shift as it spared her from the politics she often encountered during the day shift when specialty services and administrators were present. Despite being presented with multiple opportunities to switch to days, we discussed each one and ultimately decided it was best for her to remain on the night shift. After a decade of marriage to Naomi, I began to realize that our marriage might not be as perfect as I once thought. I was eager to start a family. Upon reflection, I considered the possibility of remaining young enough to participate in family activities when our children reached high school. However, after conducting some calculations, I realized that if we postponed our plans much longer, we might not become grandparents until our late 50s or 60s. Naomi, however, expressed disagreement, citing her dedication to her nursing career and she was reluctant to relinquish her career to raise a family. When I attempted to initiate discussions on this topic, she would abruptly terminate the conversation. Around the same time, I began to observe other changes. On weeknights when Naomi had to work, we typically had approximately 30 minutes to spend together, which was often sufficient for us to maintain intimacy until her return. On days off, the time available for intimacy had diminished significantly. Distractions during the preparation for work were no longer tolerated, and the brief kiss on the cheek as she left was no longer sufficient. Despite the continued depth of my feelings and the desire to spend my life with her, I was dissatisfied with the situation. I proceeded to wait for a couple of days off, during which I planned a stay at a bed and breakfast just across the border in Iowa. My intention was to revive what I perceived to be a loss of intimacy following her return from work that morning. I surprised her with the plan, hoping she would recognize my efforts to prioritize our relationship. The objective was to provide a much-needed respite from the pressures of work, allowing us to focus on each other. However, it became evident that the arrangement was not well suited to her needs. Despite her lack of overt anger towards me, I sensed her reluctance. She directed me to our living room and instructed me to sit down, a knot forming in the pit of my stomach, indicating, "This is the first time that my marriage has faced serious challenges," Ken said. "This is going to be difficult," she replied. "I hate that we have to have this conversation, but it's necessary." She swallowed and averted her gaze as she continued, "I don't think I'm in love with you anymore. I still care about you, and I'm still a part of. I will always care for her, but I have come to realize that maintaining romantic love for her is no longer feasible." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. My initial reaction was profound sadness, knowing she was the one I wanted to spend my life with. However, her revelation made it clear that she did not share the same sentiment. I felt anger. A sense of rising indignation began to take shape within me, yet I was aware that engaging in an argument would be unproductive. I therefore sought to gain a deeper understanding of the situation by asking Naomi how long she had been experiencing these feelings. I had noticed a shift in the dynamics of our relationship since our marriage. What had precipitated this change? Naomi exhaled deeply and turned to Ken. "I am uncertain as to whether anything has changed. I am unsure if I have ever felt the same level of love for you as you do for me. I am aware that this may sound terrible, and it is not my intention to make you feel bad. In retrospect, I realize that you have always been and still are an amazing man, overflowing with. I had assumed that I would eventually reciprocate that love. However, I am now uncertain that this is a possibility. I have come to realize that my marriage may have been built on falsehoods from the beginning. I am experiencing difficulty in controlling my anger, and my hands are trembling as I sit on the couch, fueled by rising fury." My next questions came out sharply. He discovered another individual with whom he was able to establish a more profound connection, ultimately leading to the realization that he could love this person to a greater extent than he could love me. Naomi, in response to my question, confirmed that there was indeed someone else in his life with whom he was in communication. This individual, it seemed, espoused a set of life philosophies that were more aligned with those of Naomi and me than those he had previously espoused. I was left pondering the extent of time that would be required for two individuals to align on life philosophies. The late shifts at the hospital prompted the immediate question of whether this newfound compatibility meant that she had found an ER doctor available during her hours. My subsequent inquiry was dripping with sheer fury. She swiftly turned to respond. "That is not the case. In fact, Ken is not a doctor, nor does he work at the hospital. He is our tax accountant. Initially, I did not anticipate falling in love with him. However, you delegated the tax responsibilities to me since I had a weekday off, sparing you from missing work at first. It was strictly business for several years, but gradually, we got to know each other on a personal level, and there was a connection between us. It evolved to the point where we would have lunched together again solely for business purposes and only during tax season. However, I eventually realized that my feelings for him surpassed professionalism. Our relationship progressed beyond the boundaries of professionalism. It became evident that he held similar sentiments. Our lunches continued even after the tax season, and I grew increasingly at ease in his presence, feeling like I could confide in him about anything. Tears welled up in both of our eyes, indicating that she had been considering this decision for some time. For an extended period, I experienced a profound sense of sadness, accompanied by residual anger. I posed a final, incisive question: "Does he satisfy you more than I do?" She responded with a passionate plea, expressing that she had not engaged in physical intimacy with him yet, and that this issue was not solely about physical intimacy. "I still care for you to a sufficient degree that I was reluctant to cause you additional distress by engaging in a sexual relationship with him while we were still in a romantic partnership. Witnessing your pain is challenging in and of itself. It would have been an especially cruel act to add to your suffering. I was so consumed by anger at this juncture that I was unable to fully process her statements about pain. I was uncertain whether to trust her or not. The agony I was experiencing was unlike anything I had felt before, but I knew I had to take action. Would it be worth it to plead with her to reconsider? I wasn't sure, but I had to make an attempt. I stood up and approached her, looking directly into her eyes and asking, is there a possibility that you are misinterpreting the situation and that this is merely a transient infatuation that will dissipate with time? I am not pleased that you have formed an attachment with another individual, but if you have not engaged in sexual intercourse with him yet, I am prepared to fight for you and attempt to salvage what I believed we had together. She moved closer to me, placing a hand on my arm and resting her head against my shoulder. I informed Ken of the situation. Despite my initial reluctance to divulge this information, I felt compelled to do so. I apologized for the necessity of this disclosure and expressed my hope that Ken would not hold me in contempt. However, I understood if he did. I then proceeded to our bedroom and collected our 2 suitcases, which I began packing. I anticipated that she might follow me into the bedroom, but she chose to remain outside. After filling the suitcases and a bag with my toiletries, I began carrying them to my car. I was aware that I would return at a later date to retrieve the remainder of my belongings, but for the time being, the items I had would suffice until I had formulated more definitive plans. Naomi remained standing there as I proceeded towards the door. She was still crying, which struck me as somewhat melodramatic, given that she was achieving her objective. I wondered whether her tears were effective because she still held some affection for me, sufficient to cause distress when she saw that I was suffering after being blindsided. I paused at the door and turned back to her. "Will you be initiating the divorce proceedings, or should I do so?" she inquired, her eyes glistening with tears. "No, I'll handle it. It's the least I can do, Ken. I promise not to make this any more painful than it already is. Please let me know your new address so I can have the papers sent there. I don't want to embarrass you at work in front of your colleagues." I nodded resignedly as I left my home for the final time as its inhabitant. I was traversing the familiar stages of grief, a dozen such circumstances. I was questioning my worth, my performance in bed, my attentiveness, my expectations for children, and how long her love had faded. I was also pondering the reasons why I hadn't seen it coming. The legal process proceeded smoothly, and the papers were served shortly after I settled into my new apartment. The divorce, as far as divorces go, was amicable. Some friends suggested I fight for more, given that she was the one causing the damage. However, Nebraska's no-fault policy and my own maturity made me realize that it was futile. After being served, there was a 60-day waiting period before the divorce was finalized. A period of 60 days elapsed before the divorce was finalized. Neither of the divorcing parties was permitted to remarry for a period of 6 months, although this was of no consequence to me. My thoughts were otherwise occupied, and I withdrew from social interaction, focusing on the emotional distress caused by the divorce. My family and friends were supportive, encouraging me to move forward. They were correct in their assessment that I needed to overcome the self-pity I was experiencing. It is unfortunate that I found myself in a state of despair following the dissolution of my marriage. I discovered a popular sports bar in the vicinity and gradually found solace in watching games with companions. Before long, I had become a regular patron, relishing the camaraderie. The next significant woman in my life, Shannon, crossed my path there. Although I was not actively seeking to date again at the time, she had a profound impact on me. She was one of the regular bartenders at the bar, and it was evident that she was adored by all the patrons, even by the wives and girlfriends. Some customers found her constant smile infectious. I had not smiled or laughed since my separation from my spouse. On a quiet Wednesday evening, she approached me. She inquired about my history as a regular patron. She wanted to know why I had become one of their most loyal customers. I recounted the details of my story to her. She listened attentively. From time to time, she interjected with questions, demonstrating a willingness to engage in a thoughtful dialogue. It was evident that she had a compassionate ear and was genuinely concerned about my situation. When I finished, she patted my hand and said, "I'm sorry, Ken. It's unfortunate that you had to endure years of believing your life was perfect, only to learn that it was not. However, I am confident that the pain will subside. It has done so for me, and I believe it will for you too." Her words seemed somewhat harsh and abrupt. She observed my astonishment, prompting her to recount her own experience. Like me, she met her husband in college, but he was a senior when she was a freshman. He encouraged her to drop out of school to marry him, which she did for a period of time. They appeared content, but when he confessed to having an affair with his assistant, who was pregnant with his child, she immediately terminated the marriage. She was successful in the divorce proceedings and even received alimony. She subsequently became a bartender. She had dropped out of college and lacked marketable skills. I could detect the remnants of anguish in her gaze as she confided in me. However, her divorce had occurred 2 years prior to mine, so she seemed to have largely moved on. Presently, she found contentment in bartending and relishing the company of patrons who valued her amiable nature. It was evident why they were drawn to her. She exuded beauty alongside a lively personality. However, it was her genuine smiles and the extra care she extended to her customers that truly distinguished her. She extended to her customers a warmth and genuine interest that truly distinguished her, despite having sworn off relationships with women for the time being. In the ensuing weeks, I found that the pain I had been experiencing began to recede somewhat, and I believe that Shannon played a significant role in that process. Perhaps it was my imagination, but it seemed to me that on the night she worked, she paid slightly more attention to me than to other customers. She did not neglect them, but whenever she had a spare moment, I encouraged her to come down to my end of the bar and engage in conversation. I felt somewhat akin to Norm from Cheers. I had my designated spot at the bar, and she made an effort to keep it reserved for me before my arrival. Roughly a year after my divorce was finalized, 2 remarkable events unfolded. The first was the deepening of my connection with Shannon. I had resolved to re-enter the dating scene as a New Year's resolution. On one Friday evening, I boldly broached the subject with Shannon, asking if she was amenable to the prospect of a romantic involvement. She gave a knowing smile and replied, "Let me finish serving these drinks and then we'll discuss it further." Her response did not instill a sense of optimism, so when she returned, I was apprehensive about my prospects for a deeper connection. She said, "I'll be honest with you. Kay, I have strong feelings for you, but I'm not actively seeking a relationship. My previous romantic involvement was so draining that I'm not sure I'll be ready for another one anytime soon." I gazed at her while inquiring further. I asked whether this meant that she did not intend to engage in any activities that might be considered grown-up enjoyment in the future. She responded with a smirk, indicating that I was being adorable. I then asked whether she did, in fact, engage in such activities, to which she replied that she did have her share of grown-up fun, and that she had a couple of friends with benefits for that purpose. She then clarified that it was strictly physical, that they tried to avoid emotional entanglements to keep things simple, and that she was not sure if I was the type who would be interested in such an arrangement. She also stated that she was not seeking anything emotionally involved at the moment. At that moment, she flashed a smile and placed her hand over mine. "However, if you are interested in learning more about a Friends with Benefits, FWB, arrangement, I know of a person who could provide you with further insight." She proceeded to attend to other customers, marking her first time in a while doing so. Initially, I viewed her as a woman I found attractive, rather than as a potential life partner. She made a valid point. I had never considered an FWB situation in my life, assuming it unnecessary once I met Naomi. However, I contemplated the potential harm in it, especially given that I was not engaged in any sexual encounters other than solitary ones and that Shannon had recently suggested that I might pursue such a relationship. I resolved to ascertain whether her interest in me was merely benevolent or genuinely rooted in a desire to guide me through the intricacies of a Friends with Benefits dynamic. Typically, I would have departed before the bar's closing time. However, as it was a Friday and I did not have work the following day, I opted to remain until the bar's conclusion for a private conversation. I observed her casting glances in my direction on several occasions. She made eye contact with me on several occasions, presumably wondering why I was still at the bar after my usual departure time. Approximately 15 minutes before closing, our eyes met again, and a broad smile spread across her face. She approached me directly and inquired if I was staying because I was curious about what an FWB arrangement entailed. I gave a sheepish grin and replied softly. She chuckled and went to attend to a couple of customers at the other end of the bar. When she returned, only a few patrons remained. She proceeded to take a seat beside me, where she proceeded to outline the parameters of the arrangement. She stated that the location of the encounter was at the discretion of the participants, and that the sexual act itself would be followed by a period of time during which the participants would either remain in each other's company or not. The nature of the relationship was not exclusive, meaning that both participants were free to pursue other romantic or sexual relationships, but that they would not share details about those relationships. The only stipulation that she set forth was that the participants would not develop feelings for each other. She expressed her willingness to engage in the arrangement with me because she sensed that it had been a while for you and I have a discussion. You'll be quite proficient once you release any constrained emotions. However, since this might be novel territory for you, we'll require a discussion after to ascertain your ability to adhere to the established parameters. Consider the matter while I conclude my interactions with these final customers and inform me of your stance. It didn't take me long to process. By the time she returned after locking the door, I was fully committed. I nodded affirmatively, and she approached, embracing me tightly, and followed. As soon as our tongues intertwined, I became fully aroused. After we paused, she looked up at me and smiled. She then informed me that our encounter was a test, and that I had passed with flying colors. She then inquired as to our destination. I informed her that my apartment was just a block away, and that it was clean with a spacious bed for both of us. I then asked her if she would like to stay over, and informed her that I would take her back to her car in the morning. Shannon did not respond verbally. Instead, she took my hand and led me to the door. As we left, she turned to me and informed me that it was my turn to lead. I proceeded to my apartment, initially anticipating a certain degree of nervousness, given that it had been over a year since I had been in this situation. However, our second kiss within the apartment helped to assuage my apprehensions. By the time we reached my bedroom, clothes were scattered on the floor, and I found myself grinning as I eagerly anticipated the sight of this stunning woman standing naked before me. We engaged in sexual intercourse twice that night before drifting off to sleep, and she woke me up with sex at 10. The following morning, she was insatiable in bed. While she showered, I prepared breakfast. I reflected on the foolishness of her husband, who had betrayed her. However, I did not dwell on this because her loss was my gain. We conversed over breakfast. She inquired about my experience with a friend with benefits. She asked if I would continue this arrangement. I responded with a chuckle and remarked that it was satisfactory and enjoyable. It is encouraging to note that I have retained the ability to recall pertinent details. She then struck my arm and responded, indeed, it was quite exceptional, likely due to my exceptional abilities. However, it is important to acknowledge that you have only engaged in sexual activity with emotional attachment since your freshman year of college. Can you fully embrace the concept of casual sex without seeking a deeper connection with me? I was unable to provide a definitive response as I had not given the matter much thought. Consequently, I replied, let us simply say, when might we engage in sexual intercourse again? It is always preferable to share this activity with another person. Over the following weeks, I came to understand that I could engage in sexual intercourse without forming a relationship with another person. At least, that was my conclusion. Shannon was an amazing person. What led me to question my stance on casual sex was that I enjoyed spending time with her at the bar almost as much as being intimate with her. This suggested that there was a deeper connection between us. However, I was not yet ready to give up the physical aspect because it was consistently as satisfying. If not more so than the initial encounter, a second surprise event occurred. One evening at the bar, I was approached by a woman whose face seemed familiar, though I could not immediately recall where I had seen her. She smiled and said, "Aren't you Ken Singleton?" I replied in the affirmative and stated that I was unsure of her name. She placed her hand on my arm and introduced herself as Anita Peterson, a nurse in the ER with my wife. My wife and I have had the opportunity to interact on a few occasions at our unit's Christmas gatherings. During these interactions, she consistently exhibited a high level of friendliness and engagement, perhaps even more so than what I had initially anticipated. However, I did not allow myself to dwell on this observation. Instead, I regarded her as an individual who was naturally outgoing. She continued expressing her sympathy for my separation and divorces, expressing hope that it would not occur given the apparent compatibility we had as a couple. She also mentioned a concept she had previously encountered, namely that couples in open marriages had she implied that our situation fell into the category of open marriages, which have a higher divorce rate than monogamous ones. I was curious about the source of this information but did not want to appear ignorant. I replied that it was a risk one takes. Our relationship was good while it lasted. Did she ever discuss it with you, Anita? Anita's expression lit up as she responded. She spoke about it quite often. I could understand how she allowed you to have women over while she was at work. When you suggested the possibility of her enjoying the company of a doctor or technician during her break, it seemed a reasonable assumption. On occasions when I observed her entering the on-call room with the night shift doctor, I was prompted to consider whether you had been sharing a bed that night. I wondered whether she had been unfaithful. It appeared that she had been having affairs behind my back, perhaps even multiple affairs. I was devastated to discover that I had been completely unaware of her infidelity. My love for her vanished instantly. I was angry with myself for allowing her to remain in my life. I was unaware of her infidelity at the time of the divorce. I subsequently suspected that she was involved with the man she eventually left me for. However, the intense hatred I felt toward her remained unchanged. I made an effort not to reveal my intentions to Anita, but I quickly recognized an opportunity for some potential payback. When you were curious about me, I asked, were you wondering if I wanted you to spend the night with me? She responded, maybe she always talked about how great you were, and I could. I was aware of this, particularly given your consent for her to enjoy herself while you were absent. I would have been interested in participating in such activities myself. This was a new development, but my primary objective was to ascertain whether she was involved with someone else. Consequently, I inquired as to whether she was married or in a relationship. She nodded and replied in the negative, indicating that she was still searching for the right partner. This was reassuring, as Anita was an attractive blonde, a quality I had not previously experienced. Perhaps she could be my inaugural sexual partner. I smiled at her and suggested, Anita, I am not currently in a committed relationship, so there is no pressure. If you are still interested, perhaps we could return to my residence and ascertain whether being in my bed is as appealing as you imagined. Her smile transformed into a grin as she replied, oh, that sounds delightful. I came here with some friends, but I am confident they will not object if you take me home. As we departed, I observed Shannon watching us from the bar. I could not discern her expression, but it seemed different. From her previous behavior, could she possibly be jealous of Anita? We had agreed that we would not form any emotional attachments, and she had made it clear that we were not exclusive. By accompanying Anita to her house, I had effectively crossed the line. I informed her that I was not seeking a committed relationship, but that if we both enjoyed each other's company, I was open to maintaining a friends with benefits arrangement. 2 months ago, the concept of friends with benefits had not crossed my mind. However, I now found myself in a situation where I had 2 such friends, which made life enjoyable. The experience proved to be quite enjoyable. Despite her blonde hair, which did not necessarily impact our intimacy, I derived pleasure from observing her hair bounce as I engaged in intimacy with her from behind. I left the bar at approximately midnight, when the bar still remained open until 1 a.m. I then decided to visit Shannon, perhaps relish a bit in my own satisfaction. However, when I entered, she did not greet me as usual, taking my usual spot for the first half hour. She only brought me my usual beer. Finally, at approximately 12 a.m., she approached and sat next to me. At approximately 11:30 p.m., she approached and sat next to me. Did you have a good time? I shook my head no. We had previously agreed not to discuss other relationships. If this is going to work, she nodded in agreement, though I could sense it bothered her. I had no knowledge of her other connections, but if I saw her leaving with someone else, I might have strong feelings too. To change the subject, I said, Anita did mention something unexpected that stirred up a lot of anger in me without realizing it. She revealed that my wife was having an affair with at least one ER doctor while we were married. Shannon's eyes widened as I recounted what Anita had revealed, particularly the part about Naomi deceiving the staff to conceal her inappropriate conduct with the doctors. By the time I had finished, my anger had resurfaced. "What are you planning to do about it?" she asked. "Are you simply going to ignore it?" I turned towards her and stated, had I been aware of this prior to the divorce, would not have been as lenient with her as I was. It is too late to consider divorce. The demands were likely to have had no impact, but I do desire some form of retaliation. I want her to experience the same pain I felt when she confessed she wanted a divorce. In fact, I want her to feel the agony I'm experiencing now, knowing she was unfaithful. We sat quietly for a moment. Shannon reached out and placed her hand on mine, asking, "So you want her to understand the pain of betrayal?" After pondering for a moment, I replied, "Yes, that's precisely what I want." She squeezed my hand and proposed, I have a rather unconventional plan, but we will need to collaborate on it. If successful, it could be one of the greatest acts of revenge ever. We will become legendary. Are you interested?" If Shannon was bothered by my previous date with Anita, she seemed to have moved past it. "Absolutely. Count me in. What is your plan?" She responded with a sly grin. "If we want her to experience the pain of her partner's cheating on her, we will have to make it happen. You have to understand that my friends with benefits are typically unattached. I typically adhere to a strict moral code, but in this instance, I am compelled to make an exception. To ensure my partner's infidelity, I must seduce him." I was initially incredulous upon hearing this, but I understood Naomi's potential reaction to her partner's infidelity. However, I could not fathom Shannon doing the same for me. I explicitly expressed my disbelief to her, and she insisted that I was not asking her to do this. She asserted that she wanted to do this, and she reminded me that she had experienced the same pain I had. She wanted the person who had hurt me to experience the same. Given that legal action against her in the divorce is no longer a viable option, this appears to be the logical subsequent step. However, there seems to be a lack of rationale behind this decision. I inquired as to why engaging in intimacy with a stranger would be beneficial for my case. In response, she expressed her genuine concern for my well-being and desire to assist me in achieving retribution against my former partner. She emphasized that her intention was to facilitate a one-time encounter, emphasizing the term "one time," and that she would arrange for it to occur at her residence. She would also record the event discreetly afterwards. The plan would then involve sending her a copy of the video, and our mission will be provided. It was a stroke of genius, surpassing anything I could have devised alone. I was astonished that she was willing to go to such lengths for me. Despite our supposed lack of romantic involvement, I was curious as to whether, upon our success, she would regard me as her hero forever. Before I could respond, she resumed her planning. "I would like to know who this man is. Did you not mention that he was the accountant who handled your taxes? If so, you should have his name from previous interactions." I had never considered examining the tax forms he had prepared. In fact, I had never been particularly interested in learning who he was. Despite his role in taking her away from me, I had never felt any desire for revenge against him. However, my perspective shifted significantly with the revelation of Naomi's infidelity. I made a mental note to locate the tax record she had created for me as part of the divorce settlement. Shannon was still strategizing. One might reasonably assume that a schedule of work hours would be accessible to the public. "Could you kindly provide me with that information?" I felt somewhat embarrassed as I responded, "I'm sure I could. My friend Anita works with Naomi. She might be willing to assist me. It would give her another opportunity to see me." I was uncertain of the exact words Shannon muttered under her breath, but I thought I caught the word "tar." It amused me. Perhaps Shannon was deviating from her own rules, for the remainder of her plan was as ingenious as the film Inception. If he made advances on your wife while preparing your taxes, there is no reason to believe that he would not do so again. I am unaware of how forward your wife was with him before they got together, but I believe that I can be more persuasive than she was, and I have a couple of perfect outfits to prove it. This year, I think Mr. Steeler needs to prepare my taxes, and once the plan was complete, she aimed to execute it within 6 weeks. Upon receipt of Shannon's schedule from Anita, we confirmed the date. Until then, it was Shannon's turn to make an appointment to have her taxes done. Once I provided her with a name, the trap was set, and my alluring friend Shannon was ready to be the bait. Everything fell into place smoothly. Shannon was correct about finding the name of my ex's accountant boyfriend on our tax forms. Jerry Voren was readily identifiable since Naomi had copied his business card, which was affixed to the original forms. Shannon scheduled her initial visit. She texted me 2 images of her attire. One depicted a loose-fitting blouse paired with skin-tight jeans, while the second showed her bending over, braless, with her blouse gaping open at the top. The gentleman was rendered helpless. The next time I met with Anita, she provided me with Naomi's work schedule. Although the schedule was not finalized for 6 weeks ahead, Anita assured me that Naomi followed a repeating 2 schedule, making it easy to anticipate her Friday night shifts with this knowledge. Shannon initiated her plan to charm Jerry, her new accountant. She recounted her success after their first meeting, noting Jerry's difficulty in tearing his gaze away from her. The plan proceeded smoothly, and Anita confirmed that the chosen Friday for the finale. The timing of the dinner and movie invitation coincided with Naomi's work shift. Despite having completed her taxes the previous week, Shannon continued to persuade Jerry to deepen their relationship. She invited him over for dinner and a movie on the chosen Friday, to which he eagerly agreed. Friday night had arrived. After Jerry leaves Shannon's apartment, she promised to meet me at the bar to provide an update on the outcome. On the one hand, I was gratified that our plan had proceeded without incident and that we were on the verge of exacting retribution upon Naomi. However, on the other hand, it was evident that Shannon was involved with another individual. Despite my counsel against developing emotional attachments, our collaboration in devising and implementing our strategy had led me to recognize the exceptional qualities of Shannon. The significance of her actions on my behalf was becoming increasingly apparent, prompting me to consider whether she had developed feelings for me in return. This contemplation arose around 11 p.m. At 11 p.m., she arrived, walking slowly and appearing unhappy. From her demeanor, I could not discern whether she had succeeded, which was troubling. She did not seem like someone who had just achieved a week-long goal was sitting beside me. The bartender had brought her a beard. I observed as she consumed almost half of it in a short period of time before discarding it. Her expression was serious when she looked at me. I was eager for her response. As time passed, I grew increasingly anxious. Finally, she spoke. "It's done. I slept with that disgusting." The video clearly shows his face throughout, which provides irrefutable evidence that your ex's boyfriend is now a cheater. I was eager to embrace her, kiss her, hold her, and express a multitude of other feelings. However, given her current demeanor, I doubted she would welcome such gestures. Therefore, I turned to her and expressed my gratitude. "You are unaware of the extent of my gratitude. Once we have provided her with the evidence, the ordeal will be over, and we can move on. If there is anything I can do for you, I certainly owe you that much." I placed my hand on her leg and let it rest there. We sat in silence for a few moments while she finished her coffee. She then turned to me and said, "There is something you can do right now." She was aware that I was not interested in the aforementioned activities and that I would not ask her to do anything of the sort, but she felt that I owed her the opportunity to take me to her apartment and engage in sexual intercourse with me. She felt that I was entitled to this request, given the circumstances. She then proceeded to describe her previous sexual encounter with a man who she found to be repulsive. She informed me that the last person to have sexual intercourse with her was this man, and she was therefore seeking to erase the memory of that experience from her mind. Furthermore, the act in question would require the entirety of the evening. Ken was not prepared to accept anything less than exclusivity. He had ensured that his partner had used a condom. Ken's body was in need of Ken's attention. Ken was not prepared to be denied. The bill was settled, and the couple proceeded to Ken's apartment hand in hand. It was unclear how long the reclaiming process took, but the couple was fully engaged in the task for several hours. It was somewhat surprising that the fact that she had been with someone else just an hour prior did not trouble me unduly. My sole concern was that she had given me more than I could have hoped for. If it meant spending the rest of my life showing her my gratitude, then that was what I would do. We anonymously sent Naomi the complete unedited footage of Shannon's encounter with. Despite the clear depiction of Jerry's face, Shannon expressed minimal concern about her own visibility. Neither of us anticipated that Naomi would post the video on a pornographic website or any social media platform, as this did not align with her typical behavior. However, it subsequently became evident that her unfaithfulness was not an isolated incident. As anticipated, Naomi reached out to me about a week after receiving the DVD, requesting a meeting and an opportunity to converse. We agreed to convene at a nearby coffee shop following her morning shift at the hospital. Upon her arrival, it was evident that she was not in optimal condition, likely due to the exhaustion resulting from her lengthy 12-hour shift. Despite the fact that Naomi had just completed a 12-hour shift, I suspected that there was more to her demeanor than met the eye. After purchasing her coffee, Naomi joined me at a secluded table, wasting no time in broaching the conversation I had anticipated. I informed her that I had discovered the man I had left her for had been unfaithful to me. We had ended things, and I had come to the conclusion that he did not love me as much as I had believed I loved him. This revelation brought a sense of vindication. Well, Naomi, I can certainly relate to that. Your situation sounds all too familiar to me. It is a terrible feeling to realize that your partner has been deceitful, leading you to believe in a falsehood. Her expression darkened as she grasped the meaning of my words. I suppose I brought this on myself. I understand if you do not believe me, but I genuinely loved you, Ken. I still do because you were an exceptional husband and my own self. My behavior was centered on a belief that despite your kindness, I could find something better. This was a grave mistake. I relished every moment of this. Hearing her acknowledge her wrongdoing after the pain she caused me was pure satisfaction. However, she had not yet confessed to her workplace affairs during our marriage. The dissolution of the marriage was precipitated by the discovery of the extramarital affairs that the wife had been engaged in. The husband, who had remained silent throughout this period, finally spoke up. The wife, who had been studying him, eventually spoke again. She expressed remorse and sought to ascertain whether there was still some affection left in his heart. She had learned her lesson and did not expect another chance. I do not believe that I deserve another chance with you, but I would accept it immediately if you offered. This was my opportunity. However, Naomi, that is not possible. I held on to those feelings for a while after our divorce, but recent revelations have erased them entirely. I have moved on, and there are a couple of friends I enjoy spending time with now. Her expression indicated surprise, and I could see questions forming in her eyes. However, I did not give her the opportunity to voice any of them. Anita Peterson is an impressive woman. I had always been curious about what it would be like to be with a petite blonde. I can now confirm that it is an incredible experience. It turns out that she has always wanted me, especially since our marriage was open, and I engaged in sexual relations with other women while you were with doctors in the on-call room. Naomi's face lost all color as I continued speaking. You are a despicable and worthless woman. Not only did you betray our marriage by engaging in sexual relations with other men, but you also deceived your colleagues to cover it up. When the man you after I discovered that you had been unfaithful to me, you had the audacity to return and beg for my forgiveness. Your intention was to resume your extramarital activities while I remained unaware. I have now had enough of you, Naomi. Even if I never see you again, your actions will not be forgotten. However, this gesture will at least begin to assuage the pain you have caused me. I stood up, placed a $20 bill on the table, and as the bright Omaha morning unfolded, the final act of revenge reached its conclusion. It was time to move on from Naomi and embrace a new life. That evening, I engaged in sexual intercourse with Shannon after she manipulated Jerry Vren into cheating. As we lay together after our initial intimacy, I came to recognize the depth of her affection for me was demonstrated by her willingness to engage in sexual intercourse with another man solely for my benefit. I am aware that this may appear to be an absurd assertion, given that I was not a particularly attractive prospect in comparison to other men. However, given her high standards and the circumstances, I began to comprehend the depth of her feelings for me. In that moment, I began to understand the extent to which I loved her for making that sacrifice just so I could exact revenge on my ex-partner. In that instant, the concept of a wife, as well as any other potential friends with benefits, was rendered moot. I was prepared to maintain my relationship with Shannon for as long as she was amenable. However, I was cognizant of the fact that for this arrangement to be sustainable, she would need to terminate her association with her other friends with benefits. I was uncertain as to her willingness to do so. It was imperative that I address this issue with her without delay, as it could potentially alter the trajectory of our lives. However, it transpired that I was not required to broach the subject at that particular juncture. In a spontaneous gesture, she turned to me, kissed me, and declared, "Ken, I'm ready to commit. Once more, I have experienced a degree of enjoyment, as you have with the blonde woman. We have both endured the pain of infidelity. If you will have me as your exclusive partner, I pledge to shield you from that suffering." She kissed me once more, and I smiled, looking at her intently. I replied, "Are you certain you can do that? After all, you still need to file your taxes annually, and there are numerous accountants in this city who are eager to provide you with excellent service." I hoped she understood that I was joking. Her response reassured me that she did, saying, Do not concern yourself with that. I have yet to encounter an individual who is as proficient at completing a lengthy form as you are." She then rolled over onto me and straddled me. This marked the first occasion on which we engaged in sexual intercourse as authentic partners, rather than merely as friends with benefits. Despite it being our inaugural encounter in this new phase, it would not be our last. Unexpectedly, there was another aspect to our revenge scheme. A couple of years after successfully executing our plan, Shannon and I were returning from a night of dancing, which we frequently enjoyed. On our return journey, a vehicle driven by a third party failed to stop at a red light and collided with our car. Despite the deployment of the vehicle's airbags, both occupants were injured. I was sufficiently affected to require hospital treatment, while Shannon was able to remain with the vehicle. She was reassured that the police would transport her to the emergency room once they had completed their own attendance at the scene. Initially, I did not consider the incident to be particularly significant. However, upon realizing where I had been taken, I became aware of my former spouse. My wife was attired in nursing scrubs, and it became evident that I was to be her patient for an extended period. The astonishment evident on her countenance indicated that she still harbored feelings for me, although it was clearly a one-sided attachment. The paramedics provided a detailed account of the circumstances surrounding my accident before departing. Once alone, the nurse inquired if I required the attention of another nurse. Anita was not on duty that night, but other nurses were available to provide care. I declined, expressing my gratitude for the nurse's skills and indicating that I required precisely the care she was offering. I shared some positive experiences with Naomi, but they were limited to a few brief moments. Despite her initial appearance of relative well-being, I have confidence that she will provide excellent care. The medical team decided to keep me under observation for a few hours to monitor my vital signs. Naomi was present when Shannon entered the room. She quickly approached the bed, planted a kiss on my cheek, and then glanced around the room, realizing we were not alone. "Shannon, this is Naomi, my nurse and former girlfriend." Naomi, my wife, introduced me to Shannon, her girlfriend. They exchanged handshakes, and Naomi said, "Nice to meet you, Shannon." Shannon smiled in response. Naomi then took the initiative to request that Shannon take good care of me. Shannon immediately asserted her claim on me, and I was not disconcerted by this. However, I observed Naomi's puzzled expression when she shook Shannon's hand. This lasted until it seemed to overwhelm her. Naomi then looked at Shannon again and asked, "You seem familiar. Have we met before?" I held my breath as I responded that I doubted it. I had appeared in an independent film shot in Omaha a couple of years prior, but I do not believe it was released widely. Naomi shook her head and stated that she did not recall that film. She then exited the room and proceeded towards the nurse's station. I was finally able to relax, glancing up at Shannon, who wore a mischievous grin. She chuckled as she leaned in to kiss me, saying that perhaps I should have asked if she wanted to watch a copy. I am extremely fond of that woman.